Yeah, I would like to introduce our first speaker of the day. We have Mark Whitby, who's with DATAMARK. He's a public safety subject matter expert, and he will be talking about addressing, a practical guide. Take it away, Mark.
Well, thank you very much. Can everybody hear me okay? All right, let me share my screen out. All right, well, first of all, thanks to the Wisconsin Land Information Association for allowing us to present today. As Carmen so said, my name is Mark Whitby. I'm with DATAMARK, and Sarah Rollins, who some of you may have spoken to, she was unable to attend today. So she and I worked on the presentation yesterday. So she's sorry she missed today, but it's being recorded, so she'll be able to listen to me. And I don't know if that's good or bad. So we'll kind of see how it goes. I spent 21 years working in 3 different PSAPs in Florida and Georgia. And then the last 10 years of my career, I moved over to the 911 admin support side. Started working with MSAG and ALI and wireless providers. And then I started dabbling a little bit in GIS because MSAG, as they say in NextGen, it's going away. Well, it's not really going away. It's just morphing into GIS. So it's more spatial instead of tabular. And then I've been with DATAMARK for 2 years now. I'm a NINA ABCO member, and I'm pretty active in some different NINA work groups, and we'll talk about some of those as we go through our presentation. So we're going to be talking about addressing, and we're going to really focus on 2 NINA documents. The first one is the CLDXF standard, so Civic Location Data Exchange Format. And the second one is the NINA standard for NextGen GIS data model, which was recently updated this year, and they're going to be putting out another update really soon. There's 2 working groups that I'm part of. One is the Road Centerline Working Group, and we're kind of expanding on what they already have in the data model. And there's also a work group for the emergency service boundary side. So a new version of the data model will continue to be updated as we go. So hopefully that'll be done next year. So keep your eye out for that. So one of the first things is country and state abbreviations. Well, most of us who maintain our own data, we know what state we're in, right? We know we're in the US. So why do we need to put that in there? Well, as we move to NextGen, we're going to be sharing data from county to county, from state to state, and even to other countries. Like Canada borders us to the north, and they have their standards, and they also use NINA standards. And then we have Mexico to the south. So we're going to have to start putting US for the country in our data. So if you haven't started doing that, that's something you can probably do pretty easily because you know you're in the US. And for Wisconsin, you know, if you're writing a letter or sending a package, you're going to use WI as the standard state abbreviation for Wisconsin. And in the United States Postal Service publication 28, on page 57 and 58, gives the list of all the states in the US, plus Puerto Rico, Guam, and if you were sending something to a military PO box kind of thing, it has all the abbreviations. So that's a really good document to refer to. But you can, if you don't have this in your data, you can add this pretty easily for addressing. The next thing is county. The US Census Bureau maintains a list, and they call it a FIPS list, F-I-P-S. And there's a link to it in here, and I'll send this out to Lori so she can share it with you guys, the whole presentation. And you can either use the name of the county or the county equivalent. So it may be an abbreviation they use for that county, or it could be a number or a set of numbers. So for example, you could use Door County, Jackson County, Clark County, some of the different counties that are in Wisconsin. And then the postal code. So currently the minimum postal code is a 5-digit zip code. And we're all familiar with 5 digits. Those started decades and decades ago. But more recently, they've added the zip +4. So I added in the link for the United States Postal Service zip lookup. So you can put in any address in any state and it'll give you the zip code +4. And it was interesting, I found this information about how the zip codes are broken out, because I never really thought about that. When I was in the dispatch center, I knew driver's licenses were broken out for a certain way to tell where, what county, what age, all those different things were broken out, but I never thought about it for a zip code. So it's interesting because you have a national area, a large post office, and then an associated post office or maybe a delivery area is the last 2 digits of that 5-digit number. But then it could be a specific street or if it's a large complex or a large building. And then it narrows it down to even what side of the street it's on or what floor of a building. So I thought that was pretty interesting. So if you don't have zip codes in your data now, it's probably a good idea. Maybe you can start working on that. But one of the big things about the CLDXF and the GIS data model for NextGen is location data parsing requirements. How do we parse out our data? Well, when you parse out your data, it makes it a little bit easier to compare, a little bit easier to find errors. But moving forward, we're going to use these data elements to route calls for 911 and to be able to send the most appropriate responders. And that's what 911 is all about. We need to find out where the caller is and get them the help they need in a timely manner. So it's going to go into things like PIDFlow. So the location object and the core civic location elements that Nina recommends. Because in dispatch, sometimes people will call and tell us they're at a location or a landmark, maybe a park, and they don't know the address, or maybe the address is not listed or posted on that facility. So we use a lot of landmarks, and it kind of talks about those data elements as well. Alias street names. You can use what they call non-dispatchable locations, maybe a park. It doesn't have a physical address because it doesn't get mail, it doesn't have electricity, so they don't send it to an energy company for electricity. But those are things dispatchers use all the time. Fire responders, ambulance, and law enforcement go to those locations and take reports for that. But it gives really good examples of address parsing. So that's what we're going to talk about and we're going to focus on today. So in the GIS data model, there are 8 street name elements. Well, if you think about your data now, it's probably maybe in 2 or 3 fields. I know in a lot of MSAGs, you have the street name, the pre-directional, the street name, the street suffix, the post-directional are all in one field. Well, Nina's recommending we break those out in a separate field. So it's easier to manage, it's easier to compare with, it's easier to find anomalies very quickly. So the pre-modifier part of a street name is going to be an example of alternate if you have a street name called alternate route 8. Well, where does alternate fit? Route, or route, if you say it that way, is the actual street name. And 8 would be part of that street name as well. Pre-directional is pretty common. We're used to using north, south, east, west, northeast, northwest, etc. But in NextGen, we're going to spell those out. So in this case, north is spelled out, but north would be a pre-directional. It's not part of the street name. It's actually a pre-directional for that same street. A pre-type is something different for a lot of places because there are streets called Avenue A or Avenue Z. Well, avenue technically is a street type or a street suffix, but in this case, it starts at the beginning of the name of the road. So Nina decided to, in working with Urissa and some other addressing groups, said we're going to create a pre-type field for things like county road. So it's going to be spelled out, but it's a pre-type. It's before the street name. And then there's something they added, which I was very happy about, which is called the pre-type separator. A lot of areas have streets like Avenues of the Americas or Avenue of the Carolinas. Well, of the, that doesn't really fit in our current schemas, how we lay things out. So they created a separate field for that. So in that case, Avenue would be a pre-modifier, I'm sorry, a pre-type. Of the would be the pre-type separator, and Americas would be the street name. So it would be broken into 3 different fields. So the street name in this case is Fairfax for the street name of North Fairfax Avenue. Then you have a post type. Well, we're used to post types or street suffix or street type. So we're using avenue, street, road, boulevard, drive, those kind of things. But in NextGen, we're going to spell those out. Well, currently in your MSAG, you may use AV or AVE. In your GIS and your road center lines and your address points, you may abbreviate it as well. But in the future, we're going to spell it out. Post-directional, just like the pre-directional, you know, pretty common, north, south, east, west. And in this case, we're going to start spelling them out in NextGen. We're not going to use the abbreviation of E. We're going to actually spell it out. And another one I was really happy with is post modifier. There's a lot of areas throughout the US that will have a street name, for example, East End Avenue. And then they extend that road. So instead of creating a new street name, they're going to just use the same street name and call it extended or extension. So you can actually add that extended into a separate field. So very usable is how these fields are now going to be maintained in NextGen. So if you go back and look at your current data, could you add some of these fields and start breaking things out and actually have a field with the entire street name, and then start breaking each of these out to start formatting and getting your schemas ready for NextGen? So I looked up some examples from Wisconsin as well as North Carolina, because I couldn't find some specific for what I wanted to show in Wisconsin. But the first one is from Wisconsin, Lake of the Woods Road. So using what we just learned, lake would be the pre-type, of the would be the pre-type separator, and woods would be the street name. And then of course, road's going to be the street type or the street suffix. Okay, another one would be on the Rocks Road. So on the would be the pre-type separator, Rocks would be the street name, road would be the street name post-type. And then I found one in North Carolina, which was Ironwood Road Extended, EXT. So in this case, it would be the post modifier, Ironwood would be the street name, and road would be the street post type. And then there are some streets that are like start with the letter the, or the word the, I should say, and then have a name, like in this case, the Orchard. So the would be the pre-type separator, Orchard would be the street name. So in the NINA document, it gives you really good examples. These are just a few examples that I found from some data. So you could start working on these now and getting your information prepared. The next part, so you have 8 pieces for street name. Well, now you're going to have 4 separate fields for address number. So address number prefix. In Hawaii, for example, they use addresses like 5- and a house number and then the street name. Well, 5- doesn't really fit into the low range or the high range for that street. So what NINA recommends is there's a prefix. So they're going to take the 5- out and put that as the prefix, and the address number would be 1, 2, 3, 4. And then main would be your street name, street would be your street type or your street suffix. So it's going to break it out a little bit different. Address number suffix is a really good one. Where I worked in Pinellas County in Florida, which is like Clearwater, St. Petersburg area, back in the day when they assigned addresses, they would assign 101, 103, 105, 107 on the odd side. Well, what if one of those parcels breaks out and now you're going to add a new structure? You don't have an address to put on it. So St. Petersburg loved using 1/2 addresses. I personally did not like 1/2 addresses because when you put a slash in a database, sometimes it can cause issues. So a lot of our MSAG providers had to provide us a suffix field so we could add in 1/2 or 1/4 or 3/4, or like a 0.5 if they did 0.5 instead of 1/2. And then milepost. So if you have a large section of interstates that run through your jurisdictions, your counties, your municipalities, you can actually use this in place of or in addition to an address number. So using mile markers or mileposts are a very good thing. Sometimes they use them for county roads or very rural routes. Sometimes it'll be major interstates. So let me give you some examples right from Wisconsin that I found. So here's an address of M00300. Well, we don't usually like using the leading zeros, of course, right? And in the address field, for the address number, we don't want to use letters. We're only using numbers. We're using the integer kind of concept. So in this case, M00 would be the address number prefix, and then 300 would be the address number. So you're just breaking it out in two separate fields. And you could still keep that same M00300 in a separate column. So that way you have it concatenated, all put together. Then you have S02700. So S0 would be the prefix, and 2700 would be the address number. So again, a leading zero in the first two, or leading multiple zeros. The next one is N is in November, 14900. So in this case, a little bit easier, you would have the N as a prefix, and 14900 would be the address number. Another example would be starting with W, W10350. Break it out the same way. You're going to move the W to the prefix, and 10350 would be the address number. And then here's an E with a leading zero. So E0 would be the prefix, and 9900 would be the address number. So you're going to be adding a few more columns or a few more tables, and you can name them appropriately, but you can have a field that has all the information in one. So here's an example from Wisconsin. So here's a street. I'll probably say it wrong, but it's Schluel's Road, okay? So there's the nice road, there's the blue line, you have the address points that go along with it. Now, if we look at what is in the GIS for the road center lines, here you see the right to, right from, left to, left from. You see those numbers. If we look in the MSAG, so the Master Street Address Guide, you have what is basically right from and then left to numbers are in there. So those match up pretty well, right? That makes sense. Well, now we look at the actual address points. And in this case, you can see how we kind of broke it out. So you have the address number, which is W and the number. And then we have another field with number _1, which is just the numerical. And then we created a direction, so we broke out the W, okay? Now, if you look at these, the map and the three data sets with the data behind that, does anything really stand out to you right off the bat? Because I looked at it and went, ooh, there's some issues. So if you look in the address points, the fourth one down is lowercase. Lowercase is, if you look at the map, lowercase is up in the upper right-hand corner, is in lowercase. So you have two that show lowercase, but then all the rest are in uppercase. Could that cause an issue with your routing, with your address points, with your road center lines, maybe your boundaries, where it would find it in a boundary? So consistency is really important. And if you also look at the MSAG range, starts at 11100. Well, what is the first address number on this street? The first address number is 11201. So that's a big gap, right? Some agencies, when they assign addresses or they use ranges for their streets, they use what they call theoretical or potential, okay? You have actual, and then you have theoretical or potential. A lot of places will do like 1100 to 1399, right? Okay, that means you could have a whole bunch of addresses in that range. But actual, it really goes from 11201 to 11359. So should we change our MSAG and our road center line to match those actual address points? Well, that's a great topic of debate. I know a lot of agencies, a lot of counties, a lot of municipalities think about, okay, what do we want to do? Well, the easy thing to do would be, I'll put 1,000 to 1,999. Boom, I do it once, I'm done. Well, if you've ever run fishbones comparisons in your GIS data, well, sometimes the fishbone goes way this way, or So do you want to use actual or do you want to use theoretical? I know the last agency I worked in Pinellas County, I went through an exercise and I said, you know what? We want to use actual for everything. So we took our road center lines, our MSAG, and our address points, and we actually changed the center lines and we changed all the MSAG entries. Well, I was a one-person per se shop for Pinellas County dealing with MSAG and the addresses that went into the 911 system. So it took me 2.5 years to go through every street in Pinellas County. So we had 55,000 streets, but of course each segment is one, you know, there could be 50 segments or 1,000 segments on a street. So I went block range by block range. On top of that, we also had a CAD system for our 911 dispatchers. And in our CAD system, we had a road center line file. So that would have things like our grids that we used for our fire dispatch and our law dispatch. And we also had closest cross streets. So I had to update as I looked at the address points. I looked at the MSAG, I looked at the street center line, and I looked at our CAD system. And we tried to match them up the best we could. It took a lot of work, but it was everything matched, and that was what was really important. And then when a municipality in our county would add a new address, I would go in, adjust the MSAG, adjust the road center line, adjust the CAD, and add the address point into the system. So if we added, for example, in this case, the lowest number is 11201. If we added 11198, that's okay. I would update everything so everything would still match again. So things like those ranges kind of stand out. On the map, it's lowercase, but everywhere else it's uppercase. So things like that kind of stand out when you look at your data this way. DATAMARK uses a tool which we call VEP, Validator, Editor, Provisioner. And our software helps us determine things like this, where we look at disparaging data sets, whether they're tabular or spatial, and we run a comparison and we find anomalies like this to help you adjust your items that you need to adjust, to clean up some things that maybe you knew about, but you just didn't have time to fix. A lot of people with MSAGs, all the 911 community that have MSAGs, I know when I maintain mine, I would go in and add things. I would adjust a range, lower range, raise a range. I might add a new street and add new ranges. But I did not go through and compare and say, hey, is it really Sluice Road or is it Sluice Street or Boulevard? Maybe one of these says road, one says street, one says avenue. Well, which one's correct? So we may have to go back to the original plot and the original plat and figure out, okay, what's wrong? Why are we having issues? Why won't this call show up on the map? Or why can't we route the call properly? So now, before we get to next gen, we need to start working on cleaning up our data. You know, maybe start with our MSAG, look at our alley, look at our road center lines, our address points, our boundaries, and start preparing for that transition to next gen. It's going to take us a while to clean up GIS because we've been using GIS for a long time. And is 911 or the property appraiser, the tax collector, or land management the only ones that use this GIS data? There's a lot of people that use that data. Park and recreations use the data. The school system uses the data to figure out where they need to route buses to pick up kids for school. If we're going to add a new apartment complex or a new subdivision, do they need a new bus stop? And is it more than one bus that they're going to need to pick up kids? And which schools do they go to? So a lot of good information can come out when you compare your data. So here are some recommendations from Nina, basically, that says this is the schema and this is what you kind of want to do. So these are our recommendations for you guys in Wisconsin. Nina wants you to parse out as much data as possible. So they don't want you to use one field for what they call multiple purposes. So having the W or the M or the S or the E in with the address numbers. So you don't want to have prefixes in range fields because the ranges are numerical. It's what they call a non-negative integer. So what can you do? Well, this is what we at DATAMARK recommend. You can add some new fields to your address points and your road centerline data sets. So you can add number underscore or ADD num underscore pre for address point. And that's a string that can go up to 15 characters. And then you're going to add a add number prefix L for left and right. Again, a string which up to 15 characters. And this is information that's listed in that GIS data model document. So where you see the asterisk down at the bottom, it tells you what page to go to. You want to remove your prefixes from the current address number and parse them into a new field. So the new fields that we were talking about. And then you're going to create a new address number field for address numbers only. So it's an integer, and you can only have up to 6 characters. Well, what if you have like a W, an E, an N or something, and then you have 7 numbers or 6 numbers and that letter? That would be too much. So that's why you need to really take the letter out of it. And then you can use something called a field calculate, the original numbers into the new field. So you can create some new fields in your data without losing what you currently have. Because we don't want you to go in and start changing things that could mess up other systems that use this. Property appraiser, tax collector. Some counties provide their data to the 911 center and they actually put it into their CAD system. So if they do that, you don't want to break their CAD system. We still need to dispatch police, fire, and EMS. That never goes away. So that's one thing we want to think about, okay? The next thing that they talk about in the GIS data model is subaddressing. And subaddressing is really, really important. So they have it broken down into a couple different areas. The first one is building. So if you have building A, you would put that in that field for this address string that shows on the screen. Additional location information. It's a really good catch-all for a lot of different things. Like the White House has a west wing, maybe an east wing, something along those lines. They have it broken down to the floor level. So you may have a hotel or a convention center that has a mezzanine level. You can actually put that in the system as such. Then you have unit level, so suite, apartments, condo numbers, penthouses, those kind of things. Then you have the room level. So you may have an actual room on a certain floor, maybe even in a certain unit. And then the last thing you're going to have is what they call seat. So if you have an office on an office floor and you have, maybe you have some conference rooms, maybe you have some offices for upper management, but you have cubicles for the other workers. You could actually number the cubicles on a floor plan and use that in your GIS data. You can even use it in your 911 phone information data. So if I'm sitting in a cubicle and I call 911, they're going to have the address, the building, the floor, what unit I'm in or what room I'm in, and what seat I'm sitting at. So technically, if I had a heart attack and I dialed 911, but I couldn't talk, I dropped the phone, I fall to the floor, they would know where to come find me, which would be a very good thing. The bad part about subaddressing, especially when you get down all the way to the seat level, is what if that office complex changes their cubicles around and decides to give everyone an office? And there are no more cubicles, but they don't provide you the information to update your system. Could that be bad data? Yeah, it could be. Or maybe you work it out where you get in touch with whoever the property owner is, property manager, that actual business, and say, hey, look, if you make any changes, you need to notify us in the county, 911, et cetera. So we can update our data so our responders can find you more appropriately and quickly. I know where I worked in Florida, we have a lot of hurricanes. And where I worked on Pinellas County, 3 of our sides of our county were surrounded by water. We had all along Clearwater Beach, St. Pete Beach, all the municipalities along the island per se, we had a lot of condos. Well, in our GIS data, we did not have every unit number or every suite number or every apartment number for those condos or those apartment complexes along the water. So we worked with the municipalities, and the municipalities would go out and talk to them or contact them and say, hey, we need a list of all your apartment numbers. So sometimes the apartments may have a letter corresponding with the building, or it may be a separate building or whatever. We had to put those into our system because the sheriff's office, during a hurricane, when we get to a certain level of wind speed, we lock down the bridges. People cannot go to and from the water because we don't want them out there getting sucked up by the water or getting stranded by the hurricane. So once we gave the, per se, almost all clear, but we still had everything locked down, we didn't want just people going out there who didn't belong there to go out to the beach or the water and be in danger. So you had to actually get a pass, and it was to the unit level. So we would have your name, your address, but if we didn't have your unit number for your condo, you could not go back onto the island. So it took us a while to gather all those units for Clearwater, St. Pete, all the different beach communities in Pinellas County and get them into our GIS data. But I also took it a step further and we added them into our CAD system. So they were built in our CAD system. And if they provided us a map or a floor plan, we could take that floor plan and actually put it into our system so the responders could see the map to know where unit 104 was on the 3rd floor. So it came in very handy. Sub-addressing is really good, especially if you have a lot of multiple address points and we do a comparison and we find out, hey, you have 5 123 Main Streets. The reason it is probably because you're missing unit number. For example, a strip plaza or maybe a mall if you use the same address. Sometimes mobile home parks do the same thing where they'll have one main address and then they'll have lot numbers. So sub-addressing are really good and it breaks it down into different fields. So it's a lot easier. For those who are not familiar with the NINA website, here's a link to the NINA website. And the NINA documents are all listed under standards and best practices. And you can list all the standards. And you can download every standard that's out there. You do not have to be a NINA member to have access to these standards. So these are really good resources. Some of the documents are what they call requirements. So NINA has a requirement document for something like 3-day business turnaround on any address changes. So in other words, Lori works in a municipality. I work for the county. So Lori assigns a new address. She gives it to Mark. I'm supposed to put it into the system. And then it's supposed to go up to the ECRF and LVF and NextGen. Well, once she gives it to me, the 3-day counter starts. I need to get it into my system and pushed out to a regional system, my own personal ECRF, LVF for my county, or maybe the state of Wisconsin has a repository for data. I have 3 days to get it up there. Now, on the flip side, I work in the county and I work with the 911 agency. We find a discrepancy with an address. Maybe the address shows as road and it's street. Well, it's in Lori's municipality. She's the addressing authority. I'm going to send it to Lori and go, Lori, can you confirm, is this road or street? So we can update our data. Say it takes her 2 days to get back to me because she's on vacation or she's at a conference, right? Virtual or not. So she's busy. She gets back to me. Well, that clock already started when I sent it to her. So Lori needs to understand, hey, I need this pretty quick so I can get it changed in my system and uploaded where it needs to go. So that's a NINA requirement. NINA also has standards, and then they have informational documents. So there's one out there called the Site Structure Address Points for NextGen. It's a really good document, but it's an informational document. It's not a standard, it's not a requirement. It gives you some best practices. So you can look at that document and go, yes, I like this, and this is what I think we should do for our municipality or our county. But you're not required to do it. It's not a standard. but it's designed to help places that don't have a lot of resources, a lot of staffing, or maybe that person is new to the job and they don't really know. They've never heard about NextGen. They don't know how 911 works. So you can use these resources to your benefit. So anything that can be used to help you learn is always a good thing. So what questions do you guys have about what we talked about, or anything else you can come up with? So is there anything in the chat out there?
Mark, there has been a very extensive conversation in the chat.
Awesome.
A couple questions maybe mixed in. I can kind of backtrack here.
Okay.
I know one question was focused on using the US National Grid and how that could apply to trail mapping.
Yes, trails are really, yeah. There are a lot of agencies that use different resources. I know in Florida, we had a lot of trails and we did our own section of trails, but then trails would connect to other counties. So we had to really work with the counties. But if you guys have a resource that has those are great to be able to use. You might have to field verify certain things that they may not have that you need for your responders, but it's a really good start. So yeah, I would recommend looking at the data, see when it was last updated, and see if that would be useful for you.
And a follow-up to that, how do you feel the US National Grid fits with NextGen 911?
I've heard some conversations. I can't really recommend one way or the other. I know some places are looking at like county boundaries, how they match up, and they looked at like census, they looked at the state information, they've looked at federal information. So you kind of have to look at everything and see, is this going to be the best fit for what we do? But you also have to work with your neighbors. So if Carmen is on the county on one side, I'm in the middle, and Lori's on the other side, we need to get together and have conversations and say, Lori, what do you use? Carmen, what do you use? I haven't started yet. So if you guys are both using the same thing, we should all use the same thing because our boundaries match up. Our streets may go from one county into the next. So you have to really look at the data. And I'm not sure where Wisconsin is as a statewide entity, but a lot of times the state is very helpful in giving you resources or saying, this is what the state recommends. Or maybe the state may say, you know what do you guys recommend? They may talk to all you guys and say, okay, of the this many counties in the state, how many are using National Grid? How many are using this? How many are using this? To kind of figure out what's going to work best and come up with some standards on how everybody's going to work together in the future. Any other questions?
I believe Fred had a question he was going to ask.
Okay.
Yeah. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, sir.
Just two things. Following up, I've been posting one of the things, and you mentioned you worked in Florida. I see that a number of counties in Florida use ELM, which is emergency location markers, which is based on the National Grid, but it gets you down to about the 10 meter grid location, okay, which is something that I think has a lot of advocacy. And like you said, many trails cross county boundaries and don't. Perfect one would be the glacial trail that cuts through Wisconsin. Back to the very beginning when you were parsing out the street names, and I know this has been kind of a discussion point that we've had with our consultants during the NG 911 gap analysis. You know, when you start parsing out, there are some very good rules about taking directionals out and things like that. But in some cases, municipalities have very bizarre names. And and the best example I have in Dane County is East Bluff. So if you were to follow the NENA standard, there would be no base name. Well,
it all depends on what is the official street name. So you may have to go back to the plat level or what they initially called the street. So was east a pre-directional, or is east part of the street name? And if bluff is not a street type, yeah, you kind of have to look at some of those individually.
Okay, because that it is part of the base name. We have a few of those, like North Shore is.
Yes.
It's not, Shore is not the base name. The base name is North Shore Boulevard.
Gotcha.
So,
Yep.
you know, but there's some that have this very strict adherence to the NENA standard and say, no, you've got to tear those names apart.
Well, and it's that NENA document. The good part is it's not a requirement, it's a recommendation. So best practices. And you're going to have those really strange ones where it's almost like a exception to the rule. North in this case is part of the street name. And so you can't really go through your system and go, okay, everything that has north, move it over here. Everything that's this like bluff or shore, move it over here. It's going to be a case-by-case basis, because I've seen a lot of different MSAGs from all over the U.S. since I've been working with DATAMARK, because I did a lot of MSAGs in the 2 counties I worked for in Florida. And there are some that do not have street suffixes, some that have hyphenated names or apostrophes, or there's all kind of different real anomalies in street names. And if you had North Shore and you said, well, I broke it out, you're not going to go back and go, okay, we're going to make it North Shore Boulevard. So that way we have something in every field.
Yeah.
And change the street name and change all the addresses. No, they don't want you to do that at all. You're going to have some exceptions. And once you put it in the system, you'll be able to actually mark it as an exception so it doesn't kick back saying it's an error. So that's what your ECRF and LVF providers, core service provider, is going to be able to help you with.
Okay. So the
we would
rule
help
of
you
thumb
with
is
the
to
same.
do your due diligence, look at your data, try to pull out those that are really directionals or something else. And then you have that handful of exceptions that really were designed to be something else. And that's what you stick with. Okay, thank you.
Exactly. And there's some good examples that Jason just put in, like James Way Road. Way is a street type, so is road. But in this case, you can only have one street type or street suffix. So the whatever's at the end, like road, would be your street suffix. And then James Way may be the street name. And you're allowed to have a space in there or 2 names for a street name, because some street names are like that. So yeah, just do your due diligence, work with your provider. In the presentation, I have my email address and whatnot. Email me, give me a phone call. For those who have talked with Sarah Rollins already, if she hasn't talked to you, she probably will. You can ask Sarah. And we have a lot of public safety experts, GIS experts. We're on a lot of NENA work groups, and we can even push that information up to NENA and say, hey, in our work group, here's a question that came up. You know, what's going to be the answer to this? And look through those documents, because some of these examples may be broken out and show you how to do what you need to do. So good questions. Thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. So anything else? I like the Ice Age trail concept. That's kind of cool.
All right, well, there was a lot of great conversation in the chat. I guess if any additional questions come in and you're going to be around, Mark, you could continue to answer them in the chat, perhaps?
Possibly. I can do that. Well, thank you, Carmen, for overseeing this. Thank you, Lori, for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity. I have not been to Wisconsin in a very, very long time. So hopefully when this COVID stuff goes away, I can travel some and get to meet some of you in person. But thank you very much and have a great time this week. Happy Friday and happy final day of your conference. So thanks.